December 20th, 1944. BC 47 hours. Rocherath, Belgium. Daniel Mercer's hands shook not from cold, but from the weight of a dead man's compass. Through the dawn fog, Panzer engines growled. 2, maybe 3. The sound rolled through the frozen forest, like distant thunder growing louder with each second. Staff Sergeant Roy Haskell crouched beside him behind the snow-berm tobacco juice freezing on his chin. "Mercer, you sure about this angle?" Daniel stared at the brass circle in his palm. His brother James had died holding this compass at Kasserine Pass 22 months ago. The Army letter had been brief, almost dismissive. Enemy armor overran his position. No remains recovered. Nothing about how James had fought, nothing about what he'd tried to accomplish. Just a form letter and a metal box containing personal effects. Inside that box, this compass had been missing. Now through binoculars, Daniel watched a German Panzer round the curve, and his breath caught. The commander stood in the hatch, tall and confident, scanning the tree line. On his collar, barely visible through the mist, was an insignia Daniel had memorized from intelligence briefings. The Death's Head. 12th SS Panzer Division. The same unit that had torn through Kasserine Pass in February 1943. The same unit that had killed James. His finger tightened on the anti-tank gun's firing lever. Revenge was 196 degrees southwest and 7 seconds away. The curve in the road would force the Panzer to expose its left flank exactly as he'd calculated, exactly as James had calculated in North Africa before his gun jammed and German tanks rolled over his position. Private Jack Henley, 19 years old and shaking with more than cold, whispered from behind the gun shield. "Mercer, they're almost at the bend." Daniel raised his left hand. The signal to prepare. But he didn't drop it. Not yet. The Panzer's engine note changed, downshifting for the curve. 5 seconds until the flank exposed. 4 seconds until the kill shot. 3 seconds until he could avenge his brother. 2 seconds until he had to decide if revenge was what James would have wanted. 1 second until everything changed. Daniel dropped his hand. But to understand why his hand shook, why that compass carried the weight of a ghost, and why those 7 seconds would ripple through an entire war, you have to go back. Not 4 days, not 4 months, 22 months. To a frozen lake in Maine where one brother taught another that north never lies. 22 months earlier, February 1943, Western Maine. Snow fell thick and heavy the day James Mercer came home on leave before shipping to North Africa. Daniel, 17 but looking 15, met him at the train station. James stepped off wearing his army uniform, looking 10 years older than when he'd enlisted 6 months before. They didn't hug. Maine men didn't. But James gripped Daniel's shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. "You grew. 1/2 an inch. You shrunk." James laughed, the sound hollow. They walked through town, past the bank that had foreclosed on their father's farm in 1941, past the general store, where their mother used to buy flour on credit she couldn't repay. Neither of them looked at those buildings. At the frozen lake north of town, James pulled out a brass compass. "Dad's surveying compass. Mom wanted you to have it, but I figured I'd teach you how to use it first." Daniel took it, feeling the weight. The metal was cold, worn smooth at the edges from years of use. Their father had carried it every day, measuring property lines and timber plots. In the end, the compass hadn't saved him. The numbers had been right, but the system hadn't cared. "It's just a compass," Daniel said. "No, it's the difference between guessing and knowing." James pointed across the lake at a distant tree line. "How far you think that is?" 200 yards. Look through the compass. Line up that pine tree with the north mark. Now count the degrees to that oak on the left. Daniel squinted through the sight. 15 degrees. Good. Now the oak on the right. 15 degrees the other way. James pulled out a small notebook, did some quick math. That tree line is 340 yards away. Your eyes told you 200. Your eyes lied. The compass didn't. Daniel stared at the tree line. The distance looked wrong, now stretched and distorted. Why does it matter? Because in war, 140 yards of error means your artillery kills your own guys instead of the enemy. Because precision is the only thing that separates us from being cannon fodder. James's voice dropped. Dad lost the farm because the bank said we owed more than we did. He couldn't prove them wrong because he didn't keep good records. He died thinking he failed us. But he didn't fail. The system did. So you're going to war to prove the system wrong. I'm going to war to prove poor boys from Maine can be just as precise as rich boys from Boston, that we're worth something. James pressed the compass into Daniel's hand. If I don't make it back, you finish this. You show them we're not disposable. Daniel wanted to say James would make it back. Instead, he asked, how do I finish it? James pulled out his notebook, flipped through pages of sketches and calculations, diagrams of roads and hills, angles marked in degrees, kill zones mapped with mathematical precision. I've been studying German tank tactics. They rely on speed and front armor, but every tank has a weak spot. The side armor is half as thick as the front, and every road has geometry, curves, choke points. He showed Daniel page after page. If you can force a tank to turn to expose its flank for even 5 seconds, you can kill it with the right angle and the right shot. You don't need a better tank. You just need geometry and patience. You really think you can stop German tanks with math? I know I can. I just need the chance. James closed the notebook. But if something happens to me, if I don't get that chance, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't waste your shot on hate. Make it count. Precision beats power, but only if you keep your head. Anger makes you sloppy. Revenge makes you stupid. You stay smart. You stay precise. You finish the work. He tapped the compass. This points north, not toward what you want, not toward what feels good, toward what's true. When everything else is chaos, when you're scared or angry or ready to do something stupid, you look at this compass and you remember. North doesn't change. Truth doesn't change. You follow that, not your feelings. They walked back to the station in silence. When James's train arrived, he turned at the steps, started to say something, then stopped. Just nodded once. Daniel nodded back. The train pulled away. Daniel stood on the platform until the smoke disappeared, watching the compass needle settle on north. 3 weeks later, James shipped out to North Africa. 8 weeks after that, Daniel received the letter. Private First Class James Mercer. Killed in action February 19, 1943. Enemy armor overran his position during German counteroffensive at Kasserine Pass. No remains recovered. The letter didn't mention that James had been alone in a forward observation post. Didn't mention that he'd radioed back German tank positions with mathematical precision until his transmission cut off mid-sentence. Didn't mention that his unit found his position 2 days later, destroyed by tank treads his weapon jammed after firing only 3 rounds. The regimental commander's follow-up letter arrived 2 weeks later. James had held his position far longer than expected. His radio calls had allowed American artillery to destroy 6 German tanks. He had died doing his duty. It was a form letter. Daniel could see where they'd typed in James's name over a template. His brother's death reduced to a typing error. The army sent back his personal effects, dog tags, a photograph of their mother, letters Daniel had written, James's wedding ring inherited from their father, but no compass. Someone had taken it. Some German soldier had picked it up off James's body and kept it as a souvenir. 2 weeks after the funeral, Daniel walked into the recruitment office and lied about his age for the second time. This time, he brought forged documents. The recruiter looked at the papers, looked at Daniel's face, and knew. "How old are you really, son?" 18, sir." "Try again." 17 and 4 months. The sergeant set the papers down. "You know what happens to kids who lie their way into this war. They come home in boxes, or they don't come home at all. My brother didn't come home." "That's why you want to sign up revenge?" "No, sir." Finishing what he started. The sergeant studied him for a long moment, then stamped the papers. "You're 18 as far as this army is concerned, but you listen to me. Whatever your brother started, it probably got him killed. You want to finish it, you better be smarter than he was." "I will be, sir." They assigned him to the 2nd Combat Engineer Battalion, not because he requested it, but because he scored higher on the mechanical aptitude test than anyone the recruiter had seen in 6 months. Daniel didn't tell them he'd spent the last 3 months memorizing every page of James's notes. He could remember every angle and calculation burned into his memory. He was going to finish James's work. He was going to prove that precision mattered more than power. And if he ever found the German who'd taken his brother's compass, he was going to face a choice between the revenge that burned in his chest and the discipline James had died believing in. He just didn't know which one he'd choose. Now 22 months and a war later, Daniel Mercer crouched behind a 57mm anti-tank gun in the frozen forests of Belgium. He carried 2 things that didn't appear on any equipment manifest: his father's compass in his left pocket, and his brother's unfinished equations burning in his memory. The German Panzer that had just rounded the curve bore the same death's head insignia as the unit that killed James. In 7 seconds, Daniel would have to choose between James's ghost and James's legacy, between the revenge that had kept him alive for 22 months and the precision James had died believing in. But that choice was still 4 days away, 4 days before the shot. December 16th, 1944, Rocherath, Belgium. The world ended at dawn, not with trumpets or warnings, but with the sudden thunder of artillery and the screams of men who'd thought this sector was quiet. Operation Watch on the Rhine. The Germans called it their last great offensive. 300,000 men, 1,400 tanks, absolute surprise. They hit the weakest part of the American line like a sledgehammer against paper. Daniel's unit, the 2nd Combat Engineers attached to the 99th Infantry Division, had been holding a rest sector. Men rotated here to recover from the meat grinder of the Hurtgen Forest. Nobody expected combat. Nobody was ready. Lieutenant William Cross, 23 years old, with exactly 6 weeks of command experience, gathered what remained of his platoon in a shot-up farmhouse. 39 men out of the original 52. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing in the chaos. Cross spread a map on a bullet-riddled table, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Orders from division. We hold the crossroads northeast of Krinkelt. Observe and report enemy movement. Delay, if possible. Sergeant Haskell, the only man in the room old enough to have gray in his beard, spat tobacco juice into a tin can. Delay with what, sir? We got one 57mm anti-tank gun, 2 bazookas, and rifles that jam in this cold." "Those are our orders, Sergeant." "Orders don't stop Panzers." Cross's jaw tightened. "We do our job. We buy time for the units behind us to dig in. Every hour we hold is an hour they get to prepare defensive positions. Every hour we hold is an hour closer to getting overrun." Haskell wasn't being insubordinate, just honest. That 57mm can't punch through front armor on a Panzer IV, not at any range that matters. And these boys... He gestured at the exhausted men around the room. "Half of them are engineers. They know how to build bridges, not fight tanks." Daniel stood apart from the others near a shattered window, staring at the compass in his hand. He'd been carrying it for 22 months, checking it obsessively, making sure the needle still pointed true. North never changed. North didn't lie. He'd also been carrying James's notebook in his head. Every night, by candlelight or moonlight or the glow of distant artillery, he reviewed those calculations. The angles, the kill zones, the geometry of death his brother had mapped but never used. Private Jack Henley dropped onto a bench beside Daniel, his Kentucky accent thick with exhaustion. "You really think we can hold that crossroads?" "No." "Then why are we going?" "Because those are the orders." "That's a stupid reason to die." Daniel looked at him. Henley was 19, same age Daniel had been when he enlisted. Henley's best friend had burned alive in a Sherman at Hurtgen. Daniel had watched him change after that, watched the fear turn to anger, watched the anger turn to something darker. "It's not about the orders," Daniel said quietly. "It's about buying time. That's math. 1 hour here equals 10 hours there. Math don't stop tanks." "No, but geometry might." The 57mm gun recoiled like a living thing, slamming back against its trail spades with a sound that split the frozen morning in half. The armor-piercing shell screamed across 300 yards in less than a second. Daniel watched through binoculars as the round struck the Panzer's left side low near the engine compartment. Not the crew section. That had been deliberate. James's notebook had been specific about targeting priorities. Disable first. Kill only if necessary. The impact sent a shock wave rippling across the tank's hull. A geyser of steam erupted from the rear vents. The Panzer lurched violently to the right, one tread seizing while the other continued to grind forward. The tank slewed sideways across the narrow road, blocking it completely. Inside, Daniel knew the crew was being thrown against metal surfaces. The driver would be fighting the controls. The commander would be shouting orders, trying to understand what had just happened. They would be scared, confused, looking for an enemy they couldn't see. Loaded, Corporal Ellis had already rammed the second shell home, his hands moving on pure muscle memory, despite the cold that had turned his fingers nearly useless. But Daniel raised his fist, the signal to hold. "Mercer," Haskell hissed from beside him. "They're still active. That turret's swinging." Through the binoculars, Daniel watched the Panzer's main gun traverse left and right, searching. The commander had emerged from the hatch, standing tall, binoculars pressed to his face. He was scanning the tree line, looking for muzzle flash, looking for any sign of where the shot had come from. But the ridge's angle and the morning fog had created a blind spot. The German commander was looking too low, too far to the left. He couldn't locate them. Behind the disabled Panzer, the second tank's engine roared. Gears ground as the driver threw it into reverse panic, evident in the jerky movement. Bazooka Team, Haskell spoke into the hand radio voice, calm despite the chaos. "Second target. On my mark." Daniel kept watching the first Panzer. The commander was still standing in the hatch, still searching. Then the man turned, looked directly toward Daniel's position, and for a moment their eyes seemed to meet across 300 yards of frozen forest. The German officer lowered his binoculars. Even at this distance, Daniel could see him stiffen, could see recognition flash across his face. Not recognition of Daniel specifically, but recognition of the tactic, the calculated angle, the precision of the shot placement. This wasn't a lucky hit by panicked Americans. This was deliberate, professional, the kind of thing only an engineer would plan. The German commander shouted something to his crew, gestured toward the tree line. Then he did something that made Daniel's blood turn to ice. He reached into his coat and pulled out a compass, brass catching the weak morning light. He held it up, sighted along it toward Daniel's position, calculating the angle reverse. Christ, Haskell breathed. He's figuring out where we are. Before the German could complete his calculation, the second Panzer hit the concealed Jeep chassis they'd positioned as part of the decoy. The driver, reversing blind through fog, didn't see the obstacle until his left tread caught it. The track slipped off the road into a drainage ditch, and with a metallic shriek, the drive sprocket shattered. The second Panzer slewed sideways, its working tread spinning uselessly, digging itself deeper into the frozen mud. Both tanks were now immobilized. The road was completely blocked. They disabled themselves, Henley whispered, voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. Your geometry just made them wreck their own tank. But Daniel wasn't celebrating. He was watching the German commander who had climbed down from his Panzer and was now standing in the snow hands, slowly rising above his head. The universal signal for surrender. Hold fire, Daniel said quietly. What? Henley turned to stare at him. Mercer, they're right there. We can end this. They're surrendering. They're Nazis. Their combat ineffective. Look. Daniel gestured toward the scene. The first tank's engine was smoking, clearly damaged beyond field repair. The second tank was stuck axle deep, one tread completely off. Neither vehicle was going anywhere without recovery equipment the Germans didn't have time to bring forward. Behind the tanks, Daniel could see more of the German column through the fog. A half-track. Several trucks. But they'd stopped, unable to advance past the disabled armor. The road was shut. The mission was accomplished. Haskell studied the scene, then nodded slowly. Kid's right. They're done. No point killing men who've already lost. But Henley wasn't convinced. His rifle was up, aimed at the German commander. My friend Eddie burned alive because of them. They don't deserve mercy. Eddie died fighting, Daniel said, not taking his eyes off the German officer. Not executing prisoners. There's a difference. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Daniel finally turned to look at Henley. Because if there's no difference, then Eddie died for nothing. If we become them, if we kill men who've surrendered, then everything our guys died for means nothing. Henley's hands shook on his rifle. Tears froze on his young face. I want them to pay. They are paying. They lost. They're walking into a POW camp for the rest of the war. That's payment. The standoff lasted another 5 seconds. Then Henley lowered his weapon, turning away so the others wouldn't see him cry. Daniel stood, rifle slung over his shoulder, and walked down from the ridge. Behind him he heard Haskell bark orders. Ellis, Kowalski, come with me. Rest of you cover us. Anything moves wrong, you put them down. The German commander stood perfectly still as Daniel approached, hands high, eyes wary but calm. He was older than Daniel had expected. maybe 28 or 30, tall, thin, with a face that looked more like a professor than a soldier. When Daniel stopped 10 feet away, the German spoke in accented but clear English. "You calculated this, the curve, the angle of fire." It wasn't a question. Daniel said nothing. The German continued, "I know this tactic. Only one unit used terrain geometry like this. North Africa, 1943. American engineers at Kasserine Pass." He paused and something flickered across his face. Regret, memory. "I was there." Daniel's hand tightened on his rifle grip. "They tried to ambush us with mathematics, with precision, but we had superior numbers. We overran them." The German's voice dropped. There was one position. A lone forward observer. He radioed perfect coordinates until his transmission stopped. We found him after. His weapon had jammed. He had a notebook full of calculations. I took it. A souvenir, I thought then. The world seemed to tilt. Daniel's ears were ringing, but not from the gunfire. "He fought like an engineer, not a soldier," the German continued. "I have thought about him often, about how close he came to stopping us. If his gun had worked, if he had not been alone, he might have destroyed 20 tanks with his angles." Daniel's mouth was dry. "What did you do with the notebook?" "I studied it, tried to understand his thinking. Your thinking." The German gestured at the disabled tanks. "This ambush. He would have been proud. You executed what he could only plan. Where is it now?" "The notebook. Lost. Kasserine was chaos. We retreated 3 days later. I left most of my equipment behind." The German paused. "But I kept one thing, because after reading his notes, I understood he was not my enemy. He was my counterpart, another engineer trying to solve an impossible problem." He reached slowly into his coat. Haskell's rifle came up instantly. "Easy," the German said. "No weapon." His hand emerged holding a compass, brass old American made. The glass face was cracked. Dark stains marked the metal, blood stains. "I have carried this for 22 months, the German said. "I did not know why. A reminder, perhaps, of the cost of war, of the American who almost beat me with nothing but mathematics." He held it out toward Daniel. "I think it belongs to you." Daniel stared at the compass. His brother's compass. The one James had been holding when he died alone at Kasserine Pass. The one this man had taken from his body. His hand moved to his rifle. Haskell stepped closer. "Mercer, don't." "He killed James." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "He took this from my brother's body like a trophy." The German's eyes widened with understanding. "The man at Kasserine. He was your brother. Private First Class James Mercer, 25 years old. He died doing what you just said, trying to stop your tanks with geometry. And you took his compass and kept it like you'd won some kind of prize." "I did not know. I thought of him as a worthy opponent, not as someone's brother, someone's son." The German's voice was quiet. His last transmission, before the radio went dead. He said 3 words in English. I did not understand them then. "Angles beat armor. Now I do. You are his proof." Daniel's hand moved to his pistol. Daniel's fingers wrapped around the pistol grip. Cold metal. Familiar weight. 7 pounds of pressure on the trigger and this would be over. The man who killed James would be dead. Justice, revenge, whatever word made it acceptable. The German didn't move, didn't beg, just stood there holding out the compass with bloodstains on it waiting. "Mercer," Haskell's voice was low, careful. "Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking." I'm thinking this bastard took my brother's life and kept his compass like a trophy. He's a prisoner of war. He's a murderer. He's a soldier who fought your brother in combat, same as you're fighting him now. Haskell stepped closer. There's a difference between war and execution. Daniel drew the pistol. The German's eyes tracked the movement, but he still didn't lower his hands, still didn't drop the compass. You want to know what I think when I look at this? The German's voice was steady. I think about how your brother died alone, how he must have known his gun was jammed, how he must have realized he would not complete his work. And I think about how he kept transmitting coordinates anyway, kept fighting with the only weapon he had left, his mind. Shut up. He did not die crying or running. He died as an engineer, calculating to the end. I took the compass because I respected that, because in another life we might have built bridges together instead of destroying each other. Daniel's hand shook. The pistol wavered. James's voice in his memory. Don't waste your shot on hate. Make it count. Anger makes you sloppy. Revenge makes you stupid. Give me one reason, Daniel said, voice breaking. One reason why I shouldn't pull this trigger. The German looked at him for a long moment. Because your brother's last words were, angles beat armor, not kill them all. He believed in precision over rage, in mathematics over emotion. If you execute me, you prove he was wrong. That in the end, anger wins. Is that the legacy you want for him? Daniel's vision blurred. Tears froze on his cheeks. I hate you, he whispered. Every night for 22 months, I imagined finding the man who killed James. Then do it. I will not stop you. But James wouldn't want this. Daniel's hand lowered slowly. He died believing precision matters more than power. That thinking beats killing. And if I murder you, I'm saying he was wrong. He holstered the pistol, reached out and took the compass from the German's hand. The metal was cold. The bloodstains were dark brown, almost black. James's blood. Daniel traced them with his thumb and felt something crack inside his chest. What is your name? Oberleutnant Werner Brandt, civil engineer from Stuttgart. Daniel Mercer, Maine. My brother taught me surveying. They stood in the snow, two engineers on opposite sides, both trying to get home. If I survive this war, Werner said quietly, I will build something, a bridge or a school, and I will name it after the American engineer at Kasserine, so people remember that precision beat power. Daniel looked down at the two compasses in his hands, his father's and James's. His name was James Mercer. He was 25. He enlisted because our father lost our farm, and he wanted to prove poor boys from Maine were worth something. He died alone, trying to stop your tanks with nothing but angles and a jammed rifle. I will remember, I promise. Behind them, the 2nd Panzers crew was abandoning their vehicle, hatches clanging, voices in German, surrendering. Haskell approached with 3 more prisoners. What do you want to do with them? Daniel looked at the disabled tanks at the blocked road. Send them to division. How long before they can clear this? Haskell studied the wrecked vehicles. 6 hours minimum, maybe 8. That 2nd Panzer is dug in deep. So we bought time. Yeah, kid, with geometry. Haskell grinned. Your brother would be proud. As they marched the prisoners back, Henley fell in beside Daniel. After a long silence, I would have shot him. I wanted to. I know. How did you stop yourself? Daniel held up both compasses, because killing him wouldn't bring James back. Wouldn't change anything except making us into what we're supposed to be fighting. It would feel good, though. For 5 seconds. Then you'd carry it for 50 years. Daniel looked at him. You want that weight because it's heavier than any rifle. Henley nodded slowly. Thank you for stopping me. Don't thank me. Thank James. 2 hours later, radio reports came in. The blocked road had cascaded into bigger delays. German fuel convoys stuck. Artillery couldn't move forward. An entire offensive axis had stalled at one nameless curve, all because of 2 shots and 196 degrees. Lieutenant Cross found Daniel sitting on an ammunition crate staring at the compasses. Good work out there, Mercer. Just following my brother's notes, sir. He must have been one hell of an engineer. He was. He just didn't get the chance to prove it. Can I ask you something? Sir, will the Army remember this? Cross hesitated. Honestly, probably not. You'll get a mention in a report. Maybe a commendation, but history remembers generals, not engineers with compasses. Daniel nodded. He'd expected that. Does it matter being remembered? It mattered to James. He wanted to prove we weren't disposable. You just proved it, whether anyone writes it down or not. Daniel looked at the compasses, both needles pointing north, both steady. Yeah, I guess I did. What neither knew was that 6 miles away, a German staff officer was writing a report about unexpected resistance at map reference NK47812, about a blocked road that had cost them 8 crucial hours. The ripples were spreading through the Battle of the Bulge like a stone in water, each ring wider than the last, all because one man with a dead brother's compass remembered that precision beats power, that geometry beats rage, that sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take. December 23rd, 1944, 3 days after the ambush, Corporal Jimmy Reeves gripped the steering wheel of his supply truck as it bounced along the frozen road toward Bastogne. 26-years-old Arkansas, 3 months in Europe. He'd survived this long by keeping his head down and following orders. Today's orders were simple. Get medical supplies to the 101st Airborne before they ran out. The road should have been crawling with German armor. Intelligence said the enemy was pushing hard through this sector, but the route was clear, empty, just snow and tire tracks and the distant rumble of artillery. His co-driver, a kid from Ohio named Patterson, pointed at a side road branching northeast. That's where they got held up. Heard some engineers knocked out 2 Panzers at a crossroads. 2 tanks don't stop an offensive. No, but they block a road. And a blocked road means convoys can't move. And if convoys can't move, the tanks up front run out of gas. Patterson pulled out a chocolate bar, broke it in half, offered Reeves a piece. My brothers with the 2nd Infantry at Elsenborn Ridge said the Krauts were supposed to hit them hard on the 20th. Never came. He figures someone bought them time to dig in. Reeves took the chocolate, let it melt on his tongue. Real chocolate, not the ersatz German stuff they'd found in abandoned positions. So some engineers with 1 gun held off a whole Panzer division. Didn't hold them off, just delayed them. 6-8 hours maybe. But in this weather with these roads, that's enough. Patterson gestured at the empty landscape. We're alive right now because someone somewhere did something smart. They drove on in silence. Reeves thought about that. About how war was supposed to be big tanks and brave charges and heroic last stands. But maybe it was really just small moments. 1 blocked road, 1 delayed convoy, 1 decision that rippled outward like rings in water. He made it to Bastogne, delivered the supplies. The 101st medic who signed for them looked like he hadn't slept in a week. You're a lifesaver, Corporal. Just doing my job. No, I mean it. We were down to our last morphine syrettes. Another day, and we'd have been operating without anesthetic. The medic loaded boxes onto a stretcher. Don't know who kept that northern route open, but they saved a lot of lives. That night in his tent, Reeves wrote in his diary, "Made it to Bastogne and back. Route was clear. Patterson says some engineers up north bought us time. Don't know their names. Probably never will. But I'm alive because of them. The guys I delivered supplies to are alive because of them. Makes you think about how many people you owe your life to that you'll never meet." He closed the diary, blew out his candle, and tried to sleep while artillery hammered somewhere in the distance. 40 miles away, Werner Brandt sat in a prisoner of war processing tent hands wrapped around a tin cup of weak coffee. The Americans had been efficient, searched him, documented his rank and unit, assigned him a number. He was no longer Oberleutnant Werner Brandt. He was prisoner 114789. An American intelligence officer, a captain with tired eyes, sat across from him with a notepad. "You were part of the 12th SS Panzer Division advance element." "Yes." "What was your objective?" "I am required to give only name, rank, and serial number." The captain sighed. "Look, the war's going badly for your side. We already know your division's objectives from captured documents. I'm just trying to understand why you got held up at that crossroads." Werner was quiet for a moment. Then, "We encountered resistance. One anti-tank gun, expertly positioned. 2 vehicles disabled before we could locate the firing position. One gun stopped your whole column. One gun blocked the road. The rest was geometry." The captain looked up from his notes. "Geometry." "The road was narrow, trees on both sides. Our disabled vehicles created a choke point. By the time we could organize recovery equipment, 8 hours had passed. By then, your forces had reinforced positions to the west. Our offensive timeline was broken. 8 hours, that's all it took. In winter warfare, 8 hours is everything. Fuel freezes. Men lose effectiveness in cold. Momentum dies." Werner set down his coffee cup. "Your engineer understood this. He did not try to destroy us. He tried to delay us. It was the smarter choice." "What engineer?" "The one who planned the ambush. He calculated angles like a surveyor, not a soldier. Very precise. Very patient." Werner paused. "His brother died at Kasserine Pass. He told me this before he spared my life." The captain wrote something down. "He spared you." "I surrendered. He could have shot me. He did not, because his brother had taught him that precision beats power, that rage makes you stupid." Werner smiled slightly. "Your army should teach that." The captain finished his notes, closed the folder. "You'll be transferred to a permanent camp in England tomorrow. Anything you need, paper and a pencil if possible. I would like to write a letter. To your family, to someone I may never meet again, but I made him a promise." That night by candlelight, Werner wrote, "To Daniel Mercer, if this letter ever finds you, I am in British custody now. I will likely remain imprisoned until the war ends. I do not know if I will survive to return to Germany, but I wanted you to know that I have kept my promise in my heart. When I return home, if I return, I will build something that lasts. I will teach students that engineering is not just about construction, but about choosing when not to destroy. Your brother understood this. You proved it. Thank you for showing mercy when you had every right to seek revenge. Werner Brandt." He folded the letter, wrote Daniel Mercer, U.S. Army, on the outside, and gave it to a guard. "Can you see that this reaches him?" The guard looked at the letter, shrugged. "I'll try." No promises. The letter never arrived. It sat in a mail sorting facility in Belgium for 3 weeks, then was lost in a fire when a German V-2 rocket hit the building. Werner's words, like so many others in that war, disappeared into smoke. But the promise remained. 1946, Stuttgart, Germany. Werner Brandt walked through rubble that used to be his city. Allied bombing had reduced Stuttgart to broken teeth and empty windows. The technical institute where he'd studied engineering was a shell. The apartment building where he'd lived with his wife and daughter was gone, replaced by a crater. But his family had survived. Elise and Anna had fled to her sister's farm in Bavaria before the worst of the bombing. When Werner was released from the POW camp in 1945, he'd found them there, thin but alive. Now they were back in Stuttgart, living in a refugee shelter, trying to rebuild. Werner had gotten work with the Municipal Reconstruction Authority. It didn't pay much. Food was scarce, fuel scarcer. But it was work, and work meant purpose. One morning his supervisor called him into the office. "Brandt, we need someone to teach surveying to the reconstruction crews. Most of our experienced engineers died in the war. You have training." "Yes, sir. Civil Engineering, Technical Institute class of 1938. "Good. Start Monday. We need builders who understand precision. Too many mistakes already. Walls collapsing because someone didn't check the angles." Werner accepted. That evening, he told Elise about the job. Teaching, she was mending Anna's coat needle, moving carefully through worn fabric. "That's good. Safer than construction sites." "It's more than that." Werner pulled out a notebook, one he'd kept throughout the war and imprisonment. Inside, he'd copied down every note he could remember from James Mercer's notebook, the one he'd taken at Kasserine, and later lost. "I'm going to teach them something I learned from an enemy. That precision isn't just about building. It's about thinking. About solving problems with patience instead of force. This is about the American at Kasserine, the one you told me about, and his brother, the one who spared my life." Werner showed her a page where he'd sketched the ambush at Rocherath. The curve, the angles, the geometry of delay. They understood something most soldiers don't, that you can win without killing. That the smartest weapon is often patience. Anna, 7 years old now, looked up from her schoolwork. "Papa, what was his name? The American who let you live." "Daniel Mercer, from a place called Maine." "Will we ever meet him?" Werner closed the notebook. "I don't think so, little one. The war scattered us too far apart. But you'll remember him always." On Monday, Werner began teaching. His first class was 15 men ages ranging from 18 to 60, all learning how to survey damaged buildings and plan reconstruction. He started with the basics: how to use a compass, how to measure angles, how to trust mathematics over instinct. And on the wall of his classroom, he hung a sign he'd painted himself: "Precision beats power," from an American engineer who proved it. His students asked what it meant. Werner told them about Kasserine Pass and Rocherath, about two brothers who believed in geometry, about how one gun and perfect angles had delayed an entire Panzer division. "Remember this," he told them. "When you rebuild this city, you're not just stacking bricks. You're proving that thinking beats destroying, that we can be better than what we were." The students listened. Some understood. Some didn't. But the words stayed on that wall for 3 years, until the temporary classroom was demolished to make way for a permanent school. By then, Werner's method of teaching precision over speed patience over force had spread to other reconstruction programs across Germany, not because anyone ordered it, just because it worked. Students who learned from Werner went on to teach others. The ripple continued. 1953, Grayson County, Kentucky. Jack Henley stood in front of 32 high school students, chalk in hand, trying to explain why geometry mattered. Most of them were farm kids who figured they'd never use mathematics outside of counting cattle. Mr. Henley, a girl in the back row, raised her hand. When are we ever going to use this in real life? Henley set down the chalk and sat on the edge of his desk. Let me tell you about December 1944. I was 19, freezing in Belgium, convinced I was going to die. The class perked up. Mr. Henley never talked about the war. There was this guy in my unit, Daniel Mercer, quiet kid from Maine, carried a compass everywhere. Some guys laughed at him, called him Captain Compass, like it was an insult. Henley pulled out a faded photograph. 39 men in winter gear. He pointed to one face in the second row. Thin, serious eyes. That's Mercer. 2 days later, German tanks came. We had one gun and no chance. But Mercer used geometry, calculated the exact angle where the road curved. 2 shots, 2 disabled vehicles. Blocked the whole road. Did you win? We delayed them. 8 hours. Those 8 hours let supply trucks get through. Probably saved 1,000 lives. Henley looked at the photograph. We're alive because a kid with a compass knew his geometry. Did he get a medal? Henley's expression darkened. He got a paragraph in a report nobody read. Last I heard, he went back to Maine and never talked about the war. That's not fair. No, but fairness isn't the point. Henley wrote on the board, "Precision beats power." That's what he taught me. The world needs people who can think, not just people who can fight. Learn to calculate. Learn to be precise. The hardest problems aren't solved with force. They're solved with patience. After class, a quiet boy named Michael stayed behind. Mr. Henley, my dad was at Bastogne, 101st Airborne. He says someone kept the northern roads clear. Could that have been your friend? Henley felt something tighten in his chest. Could have been. My dad's alive because someone did something smart up north. Maybe it was. That night, Henley wrote a letter to no address. To Daniel Mercer, wherever you are. It's been 9 years. You stopped me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. I teach high school now. Every year I tell 30 kids about a quiet guy from Maine who saved us all with geometry. Thank you for showing me that restraint is harder than rage. Jack Henley. He folded it and placed it in his desk drawer with the photograph. It sat there for 40 years. 1958, National Archives, Washington, D.C. Dr. Eleanor Voss sat in a cold research room surrounded by cardboard boxes. She was writing a book about small unit actions during the Battle of the Bulge. In box 47, she found a folder labeled Road Obstruction Tactics Ardennes Sector North. Inside was an after-action report. 5 pages signed by First Lieutenant William Cross. The report described an ambush at an unnamed crossroads. 2 Panzers disabled, road blocked for 8 hours. Then, in the third paragraph, a name. PFC Daniel Mercer displayed exceptional initiative in calculating firing angles. His use of terrain geometry resulted in successful engagement of superior enemy armor. Recommend commendation. Voss cross-referenced German records. Found a report about unexpected resistance. 8-hour delay. Offensive timeline compromised. She found fuel convoy records showing German trucks stuck. American supply records showing deliveries that made it through. Casualty reports from Elsinborn Ridge showing lower losses attributed to adequate defensive preparation. One blocked road, 8 hours, a cascade of consequences through the entire northern sector. And at the center, a name mentioned once, Daniel Mercer. Voss spent 3 weeks trying to track him down. Finally, she called a town clerk in Maine. Daniel Mercer, sure. Works for the Forestry Service, keeps to himself, won't talk to reporters, though. I just want to ask about one day. 3 days later, Voss drove down a dirt road through pine forest to a small cabin. She knocked. Daniel Mercer looked older than 37, gray in his hair, lines around his eyes. He held a coffee cup and looked at her without expression. Mr. Mercer, I'm Eleanor Voss. I'm researching the Battle of the Bulge. Not interested. I found a report from December 1944 about Rocherath. You blocked a road, saved 800 lives. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The Army never recognized what you did. The Army gave my brother a form letter, spelled his rank wrong. So no, I don't need their recognition. But what you did mattered. I did my job, that's all. Your brother, James, Kasserine Pass. Daniel's hand tightened on the cup. How do you know about James? Lieutenant Cross mentioned him. Said you were following your brother's theories. Daniel was quiet. Then, James figured out how to beat German tanks with geometry. He died before he could prove it. I just finished his work. That's what I want to write about. How one idea carried forward can change history. History doesn't care about people like James and me. We're not generals. We're just guys who did math. That's exactly why it matters. Daniel looked past her toward the forest. Write whatever you want, but leave my name out of it. James should get the credit. He's the one who figured it out. He started to close the door. And because some things matter more than being remembered, like finishing your brother's work, like keeping a promise, like choosing not to pull a trigger when you have every reason to. He closed the door. Voss stood there for a minute, then walked back to her car. She would write the book. She would include the story. But she would spell his name wrong once. Mercer instead of Mercer. A small act of respect. The book was published in 1961. It sold 400 copies. Daniel's story took up 3 paragraphs on page 247. In Kentucky, Jack Henley bought a copy and underlined those paragraphs in red ink. He showed them to his students every December 20th for the next 20 years. 1991. Western Maine. Daniel Mercer died at 70, alone in his woodshop heart attack, both compasses in his pocket. The mailman found him 3 days later. At the funeral, 4 people attended. Jack Henley, now 67, flew from Kentucky. Roy Haskell, 85, came in a wheelchair. 2 local foresters. Henley gave the eulogy. Danny Mercer never wanted to be remembered. He did his job, went home, stayed quiet. But he saved my life twice. Once by stopping tanks. Once by stopping me from murdering a prisoner. That second one mattered more. He carried 2 compasses his whole life. His brother's and his own. Both broken, both still pointing somewhere. I hope he finally found it. The compasses were donated to a military archive. Catalog number marked unidentified, 2003, Rocherath, Belgium. A German survey team found a rusted compass near the roadside, American-made 1920s. They sent it to the Smithsonian. The curator couldn't identify the owner. It was archived with no historical significance noted. But in the notes, someone had written in pencil, "This might be James Mercer's or Daniel's. Does it matter?" The road is still there. Somewhere 840 men lived because two brothers believed in angles. History forgets names, but geometry is forever. A tour bus stopped at the crossroads. A guide explained the Battle of the Bulge. An American veteran said, "My grandfather fought here," said one guy with a compass held off Panzers. The guide shrugged. Many heroes. We do not know all names. As the bus left snow fell, wind howled. James, if you can hear me, I finished the work. I proved precision beats power. But I learned something else. It's not enough to be right. You have to be human, too. The compass still doesn't point north, but I think it's finally pointing home. J. James Mercer, KIA Kasserine Pass, Feb. 1943. Daniel Mercer Rocherath Ambush, Deck 1944. 840 American lives saved. 0 official recognition. 2 compasses catalog 4BB unidentified.